Hello, my name is Mark O'Keefe. I'm Executive Editor of Herald-Standard.com. Welcome to this Herald-Standard.com Editorial Board debate between candidates for the 59th Legislative District, which includes parts of Fayette and Westmoreland counties. Candidates are Republican incumbent Mike Reese and his Democratic challenger Harriet Ellenberger, who declined to meet with us today. Mr. Reese is here, though, and we want to thank him for agreeing to meet with us. Editorial Board members present today are Managing Editor of Content Terry Sneed and community members Bill Long and Jerome Feeny. Mr. Reese will get 3 minutes for an opening and closing statements and 3 minutes to answer questions from members of the Editorial Board. So we'll give you a chance to make your opening statement.
Mark, thanks. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with all of you. There are a lot of important issues facing our Commonwealth. I think, quite honestly, over the last couple of years, we've made some real headway in Harrisburg. In my opinion, the number one issue that we were looking at was out-of-control spending. Hands down, that was the biggest issue. We've reined that spending in, and I think we have a better approach, and quite honestly, put us back on better footing moving forward. It's very important that Pennsylvania is competitive, for job creation. And let's face it, our manufacturers, our job creators are competing globally now. So we are, I think, moving the ball forward on making Pennsylvania a little bit more friendly towards job creation, which, of course, allows our private sector to thrive. That's been our focus over the last couple of years, and I suspect it will be the same going forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, I'll take the first. Well, go ahead, Terry. Why don't you take the first question?
Sure. What's your opinion on the voter ID law? Do you think the judge ruled properly in the case? And do you think his injunction should be made permanent?
No, I don't think his injunction should be made permanent. The judge essentially said that, he would like to see it perhaps pushed back. He doesn't know that there's enough time for everybody to be up to speed on identification. But look, I think it's a common sense approach to secure, to make sure that every vote counts the way it's supposed to. If there is voter fraud, if there are issues with that, all it does is devalue the vote of someone who's registered. So I stand beside the voter ID law, and I think it makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have any qualms at all, though, about a lot of questions were raised about people being able to get the identification in time for the election?
Any qualms?
I mean, did you feel the process was moving along, or did you have any questions? Were you concerned about any senior citizens maybe not being able to vote?
I put it in my newsletter that this law was going into full effect come this November, and obviously to reach out to us if there were any issues, and honestly, we did not get any calls.
So you really didn't think there was too much of a problem?
To the best of my knowledge, there was not. Of course, I'm talking about just inside the 59.
Okay, I'll take the next question. It's kind of a little bit of a multifaceted. The Turnpike Commission is reportedly $7 billion in debt, with much of the revenue going to help pay for PennDOT's transportation costs. There is concern over whether the Turnpike Commission could default on the bonds. Do you share that concern, and how do you think the Turnpike Commission should get out of debt? And also, too, do you think more revenue is needed to pay for the state's transportation needs, and how do you think it should be raised? And are you also in favor of the Turnpike Commission raising its tolls by 3% each year until 2050, as is the plan now?
Well, that's a lot. Look, we have some problems with our infrastructure. It's not just the Turnpike. And I think right now the focus is the Turnpike, but the reality is we have issues with our roads and bridges all over this Commonwealth. It's been a long time since we've truly invested in our infrastructure. And remember, in my opening statement, I talked about the importance of making sure that we're attractive for job creation. Well, infrastructure goes hand in hand with that. When you're talking about revenue, one of the things I want to look at, and we've been kicking around, In many states, the sales tax on vehicles goes into the motor vehicle license fund. Here in Pennsylvania, it goes into the general fund. I think we can truly create some efficiencies between the Turnpike and PennDOT. I think we have some work to do there. I think that we can have public-private partnerships. I think there are a lot of ways to drive more dollars to the roads and bridges that are in need of repair. And look, part of the problem the Turnpike has is, of course, there was an expectation that 80 would be tolled. It wasn't. But they're still kicking in the money as though it was tolled for our roads and bridges. So I think there's going to be a big look come January at solving our infrastructure issue.
Well, do you think, what about the Turnpike Commission? Does that worry you? Do you have any concerns about, it continuing to go further into debt? Or
well, yeah, sure.
How do you think the Turnpike Commission can get out of it?
Well, number one, we have to look at the payment that they're actually kicking back to the Motor Vehicle License Fund and understand that the tolling didn't go through on 80. So is that reasonable or not? I think that's the first thing. Again, perhaps how we alleviate that is by finding, number one, more efficiencies inside PennDOT. And I need to stress that. Public-private partnerships, and quite honestly, where the private sector does it pretty well, should PennDOT be doing it? For example, putting down new asphalt. PennDOT maybe has a role in the maintenance, but when you're talking about putting down new asphalt and redoing roads and bridges, is that something that should be contracted out? Because they quite honestly do a lot of that now, but there are still PennDOT employees that do some of that work. So I think we can look at some efficiencies to free up dollars, and then again, I'm very interested in looking at that sales tax that is on vehicles, and now it goes to the general fund. Perhaps taking a look at how perhaps we could drive that towards the motor vehicle license fund, and also shifting the state police back to the general fund. $500 million goes to the state police now out of the motor vehicle fund. That was done under the Rendell administration. I think we could take a look at moving that back to the motor vehicle license fund for roads and bridges.
What about raising any other fees, license fees or anything that could be possibly raise some revenue?
I think we can look at that, but I'm not committing to do that until I see some efficiencies in the current system. I think that's something that could be on the table, but it's very hard to justify to the taxpayers if they don't believe that all the dollars that they're already sending to Harrisburg are being used efficiently.
As far as being more business friendly too, we have the new expressway finally open. Do you think the increase in tolls will drive truckers, businesses away?
It could. I think that they look at more than just what the fees on that pike might be. We have those concerns. Of course, up in Greensburg, there was the Hutchinson bypass that was put in, and of course that was to alleviate a lot of the traffic that was going through downtown Greensburg. It's worked to some extent. Probably not as well as some had hoped, and maybe that's because of some of the cost of riding on that portion of the turnpike. So yeah, that's a concern. Absolutely.
Okay, Bill, you want to take the third question?
Certainly. There's a couple sentences all associated with the same topic. Do you think more or less regulations are needed for Marcellus Shale? Do you think the state's DEP has done a good job of regulating the industry so far? What's your opinion of the tax on the Marcellus Shale? Is it too much or too little?
I think it's appropriate. I think the impact fee is appropriate. The best part about it is it drives dollars back into the communities that are actually seeing the development. Versus just sending off a lot of folks talked about a severance tax, which would ultimately just go to Harrisburg, and who knows where it goes from there. So I think it's appropriate. It drives dollars back to our local communities where the impact really is. So I definitely support that.
Do you think the DEP has done a good enough job regulating?
I think they've done a pretty good job. Absolutely. And of course, one of the things that, and I believe it was under the Rendell administration that was worked out, was the permitting fees for these wells was increased pretty substantially. And of course, that allowed for more dollars on that side of DEP to hire inspectors. So, I think they do a pretty good job.
And you would believe that there's enough regulation?
I do.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jerome, you want to take the next question?
Mr. Reese, this has to do with education.
Okay.
The state recently released its PSSA test scores, and many of our local school districts in Fayette, Greene, and Washington counties failed to make the adequate yearly progress. What do you think is the reason behind the low test scores? Do you fault Governor Corbett for his educational cutbacks, or do you place more of the blame on the local school districts?
That's a good question. No, look, I think we have some issues in education. That said, some could be local issues, but look, I think in some respects, our teachers have a very difficult job. I don't think it's a funding issue necessarily, but I do think it's a social issue. It's always amazing to me. There are very high expectations for our professional educators, as there should be. But the issues that our teachers are now dealing with in the classroom are things that 30 years ago they weren't. So I think that we have some real social issues, and I think those social issues are impacting our schools. I quite honestly think we have an issue with welfare, and I have no idea if we're going to get into the welfare discussion. But I think it's fair to look at some of the dependencies that we're creating, and ultimately what that does to our schools, and the negative impact it has in our classroom.
So when you say it's the issues, I mean, what particular issues do you think that are out there?
Sure. Look, I met with a group of teachers from Connellsville, might have been 2 years ago now, where they were kind of throwing their hands up, and they said, what can we do? We have kids who are coming in and who aren't doing well, and they know how to do well, but they're being encouraged not to do well. And of course, why is that? I think that we have perhaps created a system where families become dependent on the government, and it becomes a behavior that quite honestly their children pick up on. So it's not only a lifestyle; it becomes generational, and that's a problem. Look, if someone's in need, we are the greatest country in the world. We are a great Commonwealth. We have a responsibility to help those who are in need. But if it becomes that lifestyle, if it becomes generational, there are going to be negative consequences for that. And some of this is playing out in our local schools, and that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. So that's where you don't really see like the funding cutbacks or really to blame or whatever.
No, look, proper funding, adequate funding for public education is extremely important. And that's why during the last budget, the House Republicans fought very hard to restore the $100 million to the Accountability Block Grant. It's a great program that does a lot of good things in our public schools. That said, there can't be a blank check for education either. There's only so many dollars out there, and taxpayers they're hard pressed to continue to give up more and more of their hard-earned dollars. So we have to be good stewards of those dollars, and the dollars they get, they have to be used effectively. But no, I don't think it's I don't think you're going to see a direct relation with some of those necessary cuts. And remember, if we're going to be honest about this, part of the problem that we had was that the federal stimulus money was used for education, K through 12 education, to the tune the last year of $1 billion. So we were left with a funding cliff. More state dollars are going to education now than ever has been before in the history of this Commonwealth. That is a fact, that is a reality. Now, the end result for some of our schools is they still have fewer dollars, so they still have to deal with that. But some of it was necessary, and resetting those spending levels was a part of that.
Okay, thank you. Terry, you want to take the next question?
Sure. There have been various proposals over the years to replace or reduce property taxes with the increase in sales tax or adding more items to what can be taxed. Overall, do you think property taxes are too high? And if so, what do you think can be done to try and lower them?
I do. That's a great question. Representative Cox has sort of been leading the charge on this issue with House Bill 1776. It's a bill that would essentially utilize a number of other taxing options to eliminate the property tax. So of course there's this big debate. Do you try to reduce it or do you completely eliminate it? And I will always argue that unless you completely eliminate it, if you reduce it, sooner or later it's coming back up. So I am supportive of eliminating it. The tricky balance is, okay, you're not going to cut, what is it, almost $11 billion out of the budget. So how do you replace those dollars? And this is where you get into really a sort of a difficult decision, and really I think it's why you've seen this sort of stall in the past, because when you start talking about increasing the sales tax or increasing or perhaps even just having a sales tax on some services, of course there are groups that will say no to that. But I think the overall approach that you're going to spread out some of those other taxing options is a good one, moving us away from the property tax. The problem in Pennsylvania is that you never truly own your property. It's always sort of deeded to the Commonwealth in that respect, which is a disincentive to maybe do a little bit more with your property and maybe set some money aside for the future to do other things. I think it's a problem for us. So I'm very supportive of Representative Cox's bill to move us away from property tax.
Now, the casinos are making a lot of money right now. Does it upset you that, as originally pitched, that taxes would be reduced or eliminated to a greater degree?
Yeah, that. Well, okay, so we have really two parts there. The original legislation that was passed under Governor Rendell's administration was dealing just with slots. And of course, we were all told that that would go to greatly reduce, I don't think the words eliminate were ever there,
I don't think so.
but greatly reduce the property tax burden in Pennsylvania. We know that didn't happen. I think, perhaps some of your readers, I don't know, maybe $70, $80 a year is what they see in savings. And of course, with some local tax increases, all of a sudden that's washed out. I think maybe, I don't want to say that the approach was dishonest, but I don't know that it was completely upfront. I mean, the reality is, again, $10 to $11 billion is collected in property taxes in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The revenue of the casinos, even if we were Vegas, we were never going to get there. It just wasn't a reality. And then, of course, the second piece was the table game legislation. And the table game legislation, you'll never really see a dime of that going to property tax reduction. And the reason is they set a threshold for an account, that it has to be so high before it spills over into property tax reduction. Now, I voted against that bill. I wasn't in the legislature the first time the slots bill ran. Not because I'm necessarily against the casinos. That's not the point. I thought it was a bad bill because it didn't drive dollars to actually reducing the property taxes. It drove it, in my opinion, to, we see it in some planning in the counties, the home counties, the host counties, get dollars driven out for their planning folks and perhaps for a convention center in the southeast, those kind of things. So I wasn't supportive of that measure.
Okay.
Great question.
Well, you talk about the Cox's bill of 1776. Really, the problem was it really didn't raise enough money. Correct.
I believe
so. How do you think that the sales tax should either be higher, or do you think it should include more things, or how? Are you still? Is that? Do you think it's just kind of a matter of trying to raise more revenue?
Well, no, it's not about this must be revenue neutral. That's the key. It can't be about raising more revenue. The idea is finding a more equitable way to tax.
The money to replace it. But that was part of the problem, right, with Cox's bill. It didn't raise enough where it could even be revenue neutral.
Right. When the report came back, it was a little over $1 billion short. So I think we go back to the table and say, okay, where do we look at? Again, I think everything's on the table. But it can't be something that's hurtful to our economy or hurtful to the residents that we represent. The idea is to eliminate some of that burden, some of those worries that particularly our seniors face with property taxes. So it's a work in progress. And again, those are some of those details that I talked about that make it kind of difficult to get it done.
What about the concerns about from Philadelphia, which does have a lot of legislators that apparently Delaware doesn't have a sales tax, or they're very reluctant to increase it more. I mean, do you think that somehow that can be overcome, or is that just something that's going to have to be
It could be.
dealt with?
I mean, that's a great question, and that's exactly part of the problem is whenever you start talking about other sources of revenue to replace the property tax, you run into those issues. Well, geez, our bordering state, has a 4% sales tax, and if we raise it, then we're already our backs are against the wall, and it's a difficult sell. Our businesses are going to lose because of that. So that's all part of the discussion. But yeah, I mean, I think some of those hurdles we can get past. There seems to be a pretty good push by a really, I think, bipartisan group of legislators to see something in this area. So again, it's just about putting it together the right way to get enough votes for it.
Okay, thank you. There's been talk about reducing the number of state legislators as a way of reducing expenses for state government. What's your position on this issue, and what's your position on term limits for state legislators?
Yeah. So I think we could do a lot of things to reform the General Assembly. And of course, I had the opportunity to offer a bill on reducing the size of the legislature, and I actually testified 2 summers ago in front of Chairman Metcalf's committee on my bill. What we ended up running was Speaker C.M. Smith's bill. We passed a bill through the chamber to reduce the size of the legislature. So it's already cleared our chamber. I don't know where it stands in the Senate. To me, it was a common sense approach. Again, it's passed our chamber, so I know it has the votes to get it done. But of course, this is a constitutional amendment. So it's not as easy as just passing it one session. You have to pass it this legislative calendar, have the governor sign it, and then run the exact same bill, an identical bill, the next legislative session, have it pass in that session, have the governor sign it, and then of course it goes to the people of Pennsylvania to determine if they want to see a reduction in the size of the General Assembly. So it's a long, drawn-out process. But again, we passed it through our chamber. I'm supportive of it. I voted for it. I've talked in committee about it, and hopefully the Senate takes it up. And if they do, I don't think the governor would back away from signing that bill. I suspect he would sign it, and then all we have to do is put it up again in January or February, and then it goes to the people of Pennsylvania.
What about term limits?
Term limits, I think, are something that I could be supportive of. Again, I don't know where that sweet spot is. I don't know what the year would be, but I think it's something that would be healthy. I think perhaps when you stay too long, perhaps you become a little bit disconnected from the folks that you represent. The only maybe thing I would say about that is that running every other year, even if you're in there for 15 years, you got to stay in pretty good contact with the people you represent, otherwise they will throw you out. It's just a reality.
So you don't have any magic number, 10, 15, 20?
I don't. I would say if it's too short, then really, because the learning curve is really steep when you get in there and trying to figure out how to actually get that bill that you talked about signed into law. I think perhaps you empower the lobbyist and perhaps even staffers more than the elected official, which kind of becomes a little bit unhealthy. So if it's too short, that maybe is a problem. But if it's, I think there should be some sort of limit.
Okay. Bill, you want to take?
Yes, thank you. Groups such as volunteer fire departments are upset about upcoming changes in the small games of chance law, which basically puts the burden of reporting winnings on the group selling the chances. They're claiming the laws are too detailed and will result in them earning less money, possibly jeopardizing their existence. What do you think of these claims? And are you worried about groups such as volunteer fire departments going out of business because of the changes?
I really appreciate you asking that, because this is something I spent a lot of time on. No. And I think because there has been some misinformation out there on the small games of chance bill, fire companies, and of course I have a letter from the LCA on this, fire companies, because they are a charitable cause in and of themselves, they everything they do is for the community that they're serving. So of course there was always this big discussion, well, 30%, let's say they have a club. They have a club that is a home association, and then they have their volunteer fire department that's attached to it. The big concern I think for those guys was that they were hearing that they could keep 30% for their club operations, but then they'd have to donate the other 70% away. When in fact, they're actually able to donate that 70% directly to their fire department. Because again, their fire department is a charitable cause. Everything they do, whether it's buying bunk gear or chains for their tires or hose, it's all in service of their community. So they are a charitable cause. So I think there were a lot of concerns about the actual dollars and where they could go and where they couldn't go. To me, this bill clearly states, and it's being enforced as such, that those dollars can stay with that volunteer organization.
What about what they're complaining is about now there's going to be more details, more paperwork. They're saying, well, we're going to have to hire a CPA or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there a way around that?
No, there really is not, under the law that is currently in place, there really is not. And it is somewhat burdensome. And that is a little bit of a concern to me, simply because these volunteers, I think if the taxpayers really had a good understanding of what these firemen do, they would give a fireman a hug every single day. Because number one, they're actually going out at 2 or 3 in the morning when the snow's falling and, answering that call when someone in their community is in need. Number two, they're getting extensive training. They are professionals, and they spend a tremendous amount of time training to go out on these calls. And number three, they're standing on the side of the street selling hoagies to raise money to actually buy the gear to serve the community. So I do have some concerns with the paperwork. I think it is somewhat burdensome. Some of it is driven simply by the tax law, and that and that is what it is, and that's sort of out of my control. But I think there is some willingness to look at, okay, what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. So there have been a lot of discussions. I'm even going back and looking at, there's a bill out there to legalize 50/50s, because right now 50/50s are not legal. Could volunteer fire departments do 50/50s? So I think we are discussing it, we're looking at it, and perhaps we'll look at that paperwork. But under the current law as it stands, no, there is not an option.
Well, and I think that should be looked at, because any organization, you go to any Friday night football game, they're selling 50/50s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
Technically, they're breaking the law.
Should be looked at.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yep. So we're in pretty good discussions on some of that stuff.
Good.
That's the one good thing about this bill running, was the fact that it really started a good conversation about what's appropriate and what's not.
It seems to me it brings a lot of things to light that just haven't been considered or not enforced.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it, quite honestly, just has not been enforced. Yes, sir.
What do you think of the law that, or the amendment that was passed by the House, and I guess it's going to go to the Senate now, or maybe committee, I guess, was passed?
Which amendment? And we ran all kinds of amendments on the small games of chance. We loaded up several Senate bills.
I guess it was the Senate that looked at it. I think it's going to the House now.
Okay. I'm not exactly familiar with the legislation you're talking about. I can get back to you on that. I'm sorry. But what we did was, I remember the one, just because of the number, Senate Bill 444, we loaded up with several amendments. Whether or not they're sending it back after they made some changes on concurrence or not, I have not seen that yet. Although I suspect by later this week, we'll get the report on what's coming back for the House to consider next week. So by the end of the week, I should have a good feel for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's, anybody have anything else there? I guess that'll conclude the questions. We'll give you 3 minutes now for a closing statement.
Thanks. Again, it's been a real honor serving as the state representative in the 59th Legislative District. Under the current district, I have Bullskin and Salt Lick. We don't know how that's going to end up going forward with redistricting, of course. Most maps have me coming out of Salt Lick and Bullskin and going into Somerset. But it's been a great honor serving in the 59th. I look forward to serving for another 2 years. And again, my pledge is as solid as it was 4 years ago. Our job is to control spending, make sure government's running as efficiently as possible, making sure that the services that are necessary are there for those who need them, and making Pennsylvania friendly towards job creation to move our private sector forward. Thank you.
Okay, again, we want to thank Mr. Reese for agreeing to meet with us today, and thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Too easy.